Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another public event hosted by Atrium Academy. I am Raphael, and I have the pleasure to have our lead instructor Tom here today to go over hook data and how to index hook data. Um, Tom, you made it through your first session or your first cohort of the UHI Hook Incubator. I'm excited to have you back here again to keep blessing our audience.
No, thank you very much. Yes, as Raphael mentioned, I joined um, Atrium Academy in the first cohort. I'd been working in DeFi for a little while, couple of years, and was really excited by Uniswap V4 coming out and just being a big hopeful upgrade on Uniswap V3. Um, a lot of its functionality and its core improvements has been adding hook logic, which is a blessing and a curse in a lot of ways. It lets us do some really fantastic things, apply our own enforced logic as we're coming into swaps and liquidity modifications. But by the same token, one issue that has become quite predominant, especially when the platform first released, was that the data just wasn't able to be accounted for very easily. So in Uniswap V3 and V2, I believe as well, every time you created a pool, it would be its own contract. It would just be deployed. So if you wanted to do any data tracking, you would just find the factory that created it, watch the template, add it to the subgraph, and it was very much swap goes in and then data comes out. And it was really nice and simple to follow that along on that side. But what Uniswap v4 now offers us is, firstly, it's an optimized single point of contact. It's a singleton contract, and all the flow goes through that. But during this presentation, I'll show you some of the issues that that kind of brings into play when looking from a data point of view, and how the Uniswap Foundation and some of the people around that have put in some standards in place that make sure that everything flows correctly. So yeah, today we're just going to have a look at indexing hook data. It's a bit of a shorter public talk and presentation, but I'm going to try and explain everything quite well. And if there's any questions along the way, please feel free to throw them into a chat. And I've got some designated time at the end that we can run through all of those as well. So when Uniswap v4 released, there was a range of Dune dashboards, which is a good crypto Twitter standard place to find all of your data. And the Uniswap Foundation did a great job of quickly tracking all of the events that were sent through the pool manager and displaying it in a dashboard. And here's an excerpt just here that I have for some of the more important information. So in V4, the daily volume that's going across all of their different chains. So looking at each of the different pool manager contracts and the swaps going through there. The TVL, so the treasury value locked or total value locked on all the chains, and the swap fees. So they're three bits of key information that every hook that any engineer puts out, it'll kind of have, you'll see your volume, which is just the number of swaps, and you'll see the swap fees, which is just the percentage taken. So you can see here it's probably roughly about 1%, which is your average swap fee. And if I just quickly go over to the page, you can see there's a lot more information that they pull out, looking at L2 distribution and different networks. But realistically, I've kind of cherry picked the information that focuses more around what hooks we'll be outputting explicitly. And how do we get that data? So in the pool manager, when you execute a swap, it will see if your hook needs to call before swap. It'll do all those things. And then we get into an internal swap function eventually. And we do three key things. We perform a swap against the pool. We see if there are protocol fees to capture, Uniswap v4 stuff, and then we emit the swap. And this information gives us the pool ID that's being swapped against, the router that sent the swap request. So not the actual end recipient, but the router that facilitated the swap. And then we get bits about the swap. So the amount of token 0 and amount of token 1, either negative or positive, that was spent or received. The ending state of the pool, so the liquidity that it ended up as, the ticket ended up as, and then finally the swap fee. So you can see from those bits of information, just from the deltas in the amount and the swap fee, we can build up our data, which is perfect. It's the similar way that Uniswap v3 works, Uniswap v2 works, and it allows us to pull it all in together. But what happens when we have Uniswap v4 hook functionality is that if Alice comes along to make a swap and it hits our hook, if we're using balance delta returns, we can actually modify the amount that hits the pool manager at the end. And this gives us one of 2 points of variance. So we can either send some of our swap to an internal or external AMM that's not the pool manager. So if someone said, I want to swap 1 ETH for 4,000 USDC, our hook might say, well, I've already got 2,000 USDC as an offer from an external source, which will give us half an ETH. We'll accept that. And then the hook will just say to the pool manager, we want to swap half an ETH for $2,000. And then the hook will come back and fulfill the swap router. And the swap router's happy. It doesn't care. It got exactly what it wanted when we come to do the accounting. But our hook facilitated the swap. Now, the issue falls when we come to look at the swap logic is that Uniswap v4 has no context of the internal swap that we did. So the delta amount will be 0.5 ETH or negative 0.5, and the delta amount 1 will be positive 2,000. So when we come to Uniswap's beautiful data dashboards, or if it's a dashboard for your protocol, what you'll actually see is the daily volume will be completely wrong. So that might just say $600,000 or $600 million, sorry, when in reality, there's now $150 million missing from your transactions. And that is where Jackie, who is head of data science at Uniswap Foundation, has put together with her team a data standard, which if your hook is doing any kind of custom fees or any kind of before swap deltas, like modifying the swaps, there are 2 standard hooks, hook events that can be triggered, and all of the Uniswap v4 data dashboards, subgraphs will start to pick up on it, and it will be indexed based on that. And these 2 events, the first one is if you are facilitating a swap. So it's a very similar format to how we saw the pool manager's internal event, but it's called hook swap. So you again pass the pool ID and the router, so your ID and your message sender. But this time you just pass the amount 0 and amount 1 that your hook has facilitated. And then any fees that are taken by your hook. So not given to liquidity providers and donated in that sense, but fees that your hook is extracting to hold in itself. And that equates to this, again, here, this chart. So we do our swap, and when we hit the internal AMM, we'd now be sending a hook swap event manually in the internal external AMM, and then the pool manager would facilitate the remainder of that. So this would be used whenever we're using the before swap return delta, which I'll show shortly, to modify the amount that Uniswap will be handling. And the other type of event that we have here is a hook fee. And this is contrary to the LP fee amount that we have on HookSwap. The hook fee is if you are taking it for liquidity providers and giving it to them outside the realm of the Uniswap v4 protocol. It may seem like a strange hook to have, but I do have a pretty good example of this that I'll show in a second, which was actually coincidentally the project that I built at the Atrium Academy cohort as my capstone project. But I'll deep dive into that in just a minute. So what I'll do is I'll just take a quick pause for questions, but then what I'd like to do is explore further into the code and try and work with some examples as well. So if there are any questions, just while I remember which tab to look at, then please do type them up in the chat and I'll happily run through them before I dive back in.
So for that hook fee event, would that also be like for if I have if I'm using donate, would I put that event in there?
So donate should, in theory, actually emit its own event. But I have seen a lot of protocols doing it. So if I, in fact, it's a very good question. Let me just open that up to look. V4 core source pool manager. So yeah, when you actually do a donation via the pool manager, it will already emit the donate event. The hook fee would actually be used if you're completely bypassing Uniswap v4's approach of fee distribution. So I think it would actually be quite nice to show with a bit of an example. So this is a project I work on outside of Atrium, and it uses something called the internal swap pool. And what that does is it allows us to essentially front run Uniswap v4 swapping. And rather than providing fees in either ETH or token 0 and token 1, we want to be in a position where the recipient will only ever get token 0. And the reasoning behind this is if you imagine you've created a liquidity pool for a volatile token or like a very liquid token, a meme coin is quite a good example of that. You might be in a position where you've created a liquidity pool, but the majority of your fees, especially at the start, will be people spending ETH to buy the token. So a lot of the fees will be coming in your token, which as a creator, you don't particularly want to sell. Because by selling the token, you reduce the token price. And then you get into this vicious cycle where whenever you want to realize profit, you actually have to be a detriment to your users, which makes them sell the token because the price is crashing. So what the internal swap pool does, thanks to Uniswap v4, is it captures any of the fees that would otherwise be provided in token 1, and it holds them in an internal swap pool so that essentially one tick below current price, so that if anyone tries to buy or sell tokens, we try to facilitate that swap within our hook. And then that will convert all of those fees to ETH. And then that ETH is just given to the user. So you bypass this requirement to sell your own token. And instead, we just partially fill these fee amounts. And that is where we would be required to use the hook fee event, because we actually have, technically, according to Uniswap, this hook has no fees. It's set as 0. But in reality, through the functionality, I believe it just comes down into, I won't try and explain all of it, lots of internal functions here and going off it everywhere. But essentially in the after swap, we capture the amount that was received by the end user and take the 1% fee at that point. So they essentially execute a 0% fee swap, and then the 1% is taken retrospectively, moved into the internal swap pool. We do all magic with that elsewhere. But then we call this magic function just here, which is emit swap update. And this is where we use the Uniswap v4 or the Uniswap Foundation's designated functions. So we have the hook swap event and so pool swap is our internal site, and then a standardized library for Uniswap hook events, which just calls the fee. And that's the kind of instance that you'd want to use hook fee. Sorry, it seems like a very niche instance from my part there, but it's essentially in a case of you're handling the fee differently to how Uniswap expects it. So we don't have the concept of liquidity providers in this project. It's centrally owned liquidity. And then, yeah, we distribute fees completely separately and emit the hook swap as well. So that's the kind of instance you want to do that. And in terms of the actual utilization of these standards, there is a group which I will just put in the chat as well, which is run by Uniswap Foundation. I've just put that into chat now, which is a Telegram group. It's run by Jackie and some of the Uniswap Foundation team, and it's heavy discussions around data incorporation, how data can be used if you want to read it from the subgraph, and yeah, different advances. But it is a standard that was released shortly after the Uniswap v4 launched. So there was a slow uptake, especially with the initial immutable pools that came into place, like Bunny and some other platforms like that. But a lot have started to incorporate it. And with regards to uptake to these events, there is a platform v4.xyz which incorporates a lot of this data. So this is powered by a subgraph provider called Envia. And they bring in, all this like pool analysis and TVL analysis from and make their subgraph available and API calls. So it is quite important that your hooks start to push out this data, not just for the good of a decentralized Dune dashboard, but also if people start to build on top of your pool. So if they start to read your data via an API, if they start to try and parse your data by a subgraph to look at which of your tokens are making the most fees, if you look at Telegram bots and they're wanting to integrate with your kind of pools, they're also going to rely on this data. So it's very good for future proofing. It's insanely low gas cost to emit a standardized event. And yeah, there's really good uptake in those areas. And those kind of come together on that side of things. So I'll take another short break for a question there because I know it has gone a little bit quicker, and then I will look at expanding the talk to explore kind of some other data areas and other methods of actually indexing Uniswap data and how subgraphs are actually built on that side as well. And as a typical Brit, this will give me a chance to just have a cup of tea as well. Wow, no questions. You're making me work for it today. Okay. Right, let me just bring this up. Oh, thank you for the question. Yeah, so question from Ken. So if I, for example, just calculate custom dynamic fees, but keep it charged via the standard way, I don't have to input extra events. That's right, yeah. So if you were to capture fees from your swap, so say you set a 0% swap fee and then you took it in after swap, as a dynamic fee, say ranging between 1% and 10%. And then you just called the traditional method of donate, which is the way that you would normally provide fees to in-range liquidity providers. Uniswap would emit those events for you. So you wouldn't need to do anything extra in that point. And no, more than welcome. And if you were taking, say you captured that 10% of fees but then you were taking 1% for the protocol, or you took 1% fees and yeah, you just took a small amount for the protocol fees, that would come in the Hook LP fee amount. So yeah, if you're capturing fees internally for your protocol or you have self-hosted liquidity, it goes in that one. So yeah, Hook Swap is the one that's majoritively used. Hook fee is more niche, but still serves a bit of a purpose there. Perfect. And I'm just taking one quick look. There we go. Now, I just bigged up Envio, so I'm really hoping their repository does make reference to these custom event handlers, otherwise I'm going to look silly. Let's swap handler. Okay, it won't be the first time I've looked silly. So what I've just brought in here is there is the Uniswap v4 indexer, which is a public repository that's put out by the Envio guys. Really friendly bunch if you are looking to do any work with data analysis, data pull down. I'm in no way affiliated with them, but I've chatted to guys quite a few times. They provide a really, really quick data source for integrating there. Turn my brightness up slightly. So if you were actually wanting to come on and let's say index data, you can run it through TypeScript, or if you're more comfortable, you can run it in the graph, which would give you a GraphQL schema. But this kind of acts as a generation protocol to generate it for you. There's three main areas that you need to index to build up your data. So the first of this is initialize. So every Uniswap v4 pool that holds any liquidity, facilitates swaps, must first be initialized against the pool manager. And this just gives Uniswap v4 context of it. So it makes sure that the pool exists, provides an initial square root price. And then you just want to bring in the information to say, deployed on this chain, there you go. If it's got a hook attached, and then register the tokens that are in place. And that's pretty much all you really need to do when you're initializing. You then have liquidity modification, and this is when people would create or remove liquidity. And this allows you to keep a tab essentially of the current tick of your pool to find the current price, find information about the depth of liquidity between different ticks. So you can start to map out the available liquidity. So if you were running a graphing process or a charting application, you can bring that in. If you just wanted to see how much liquidity was available or the TVL of your pool, you can start to pull it in from liquidity modifications. And every time you modify liquidity, it'll either go up and more liquidity will be provided, or liquidity will go down and someone's withdrawn liquidity there. And then the final piece of that puzzle would be to allow for a swap handler. So that's every time a swap is made against the pool manager, it will then pull out that information. And it'll say, this amount of token 0 was removed from the pool manager, this amount of token was put back in. And that will give you your buys and your sells, and will also theoretically update the liquidity available in your pool. And the way that your data is indexed against that is by using what Uniswap v4 call a pool key, which can also be encoded into a pool ID. So a pool key provides the 5 different bits of information that uniquely define any pool in Uniswap v4. So there can't be any two pools the same. And that breaks down to a currency 0 and a currency 1. So in this instance, it could be ETH and USDC or can't think of any other tokens, ETH and Play token or ETH and WETH, anything you'd potentially want. It doesn't always have to be ETH. I'm just not very creative at coming up at other token names. You can then define a fee, which would range between 0 and 100%. And you can also put in a dynamic fee flag, which allows your pool to do cool stuff with dynamic fees. Tick spacing allows you to specify how many ticks it has to go over before it recalculates price impact and price change. And it also spaces out how the liquidity can be distributed. So it's over wider ranges. And then a hooks contract is where if you're creating custom hooks, you put your address, and then Uniswap v4 knows to query your address for your different hook points before after swaps. So what this essentially means is when you're indexing your data and your events, you can't pass a structure because that's 5 pieces of unique information. And instead, what you need to provide is a pool ID. And that, at its simplest level, is just a Keccak 256 encoding of that structure. And that will be what you use to look up any kind of information for your pools in subgraphs, whether it's MVO or on the graph, any of those kind of sources, you'll use this pool ID. And as an example of that, if I can find a bookmark, I saved an example of, there we go, an actual browsable GraphQL. So Uniswap v4 have put out a subgraph for their base implementation for each of their chains. They've got one for Ethereum, Base, Unichain, and all of those. And what you can then do is start to make query calls against the subgraph. So you don't have to write all of these custom indexes yourself. Like, there can be benefits if you're building a broader protocol. You'll probably be in the instance of you'll need a subgraph anyway to, push and get data from specific to your hook. But if you just want generic data and you want to do data indexing, you can come onto the subgraph and start to find, let's say, pools. And then look for some IDs, and you can start to so if I wanted to just get pools and see if specific pools had liquidity, I can specify the pool ID, break out that information, or I can start to do things where I can say, right, which pool has the most liquidity? I just don't think about it. Order direction. Descending. So you can see whatever this pool is, theoretically, has really high liquidity, but as an example, you can then use that to just browse any of your information. And by the same token, if you go into a platform such as June, you can find the queries that were actually used to collate this information, either access it via an API, or you can find the direct SQL query that was run to generate this information. So if I come into here, you can use the from the DEX data source, reference Uniswap and version v4, and you can just start to pull out live information. So this is why I would say that Uniswap v4 why the Uniswap Foundation are so important here, because this kind of large scale data aggregation, without this, we wouldn't be able to quickly spin up and create front ends that could pull in such live data. When people created new hook projects, they wouldn't be able to find out, which were popular, activity that was coming in. So yeah, they are a small team, but really passionate. So I definitely recommend jumping into a Telegram group if you're interested in the data side or even just have questions. Very supportive back and forth. And definitely recommend giving Jackie a follow as well. Handle's just there. And yeah, that is actually probably all the content I can think to explore at the moment. I know it's a little bit shorter, so if there's any other areas that you'd like me to explore, any other questions, or any other Uniswap v4 focused areas, can keep it quite broad. I am definitely more than happy to explore those as well.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Tom. Um, I guess I have a question. What are teams doing with like all this data? What are they besides like displaying it and tracking? Um, how are they using it like as a part of their protocol?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, without and really not meaning to show myself here, so we, I say show myself, I did none of this building, I'm not clever enough. But in project uh this Flaunch project that we've been working on, so we worked closely with Base around their release of Flash blocks, and using the subgraph, so taking in the custom events that were fired, the Uniswap puck events, as well as our own internal pool swap, which we index separately. But we actually have um, created our own like live chart mapping. So this works on a flash blocks basis. So rather than waiting every 2 seconds for base to update, or even longer on Ethereum mainnet, this updates every 200 milliseconds. So it's near live like charting interfacing. And all of the data that you kind of see on this page, it's broken down from three main sources. So we use Moralis, which is more for your historical data, pulls in like helps to pull in token holders, that kind of thing. We use our own internal subgraph, which uses the um, individual swapping events. So like the custom hook contract that we use, we read the hook swap and hook fee events from that. And then we use the kind of the Uniswap v4 subgraph data to help populate some like global stats. And there's also another really nice one, which was Hook Rank, was built very early days. Um, this was a project that launched near when Uniswap v4 was first released. And to my knowledge, they don't have any of their own contracts, or I don't know if they've expanded into using their own indexing approach now, but they essentially use the tools to rank different hooks that are available based on the amount of traffic and liquidity and different bits of trading data that go through that. So they create this whole front end facing resource and protocol like instance without actually having any smart contracts writing their own subgraphs. They might have evolved to write their own now to index it better, but or to index it faster, I should say, or specific things. But yeah, the all this data was initially just pulled directly from the data sources. And I know data dashboards, it's kind of the main reason you use Subgraph in a lot of instances. But there's also Telegram bots that are built out of analyzing when pools are initialized. Because once you know a pool's initialized, you can see the source, like the person that initialized it. You can glean some information about it. And then you can start to see swaps if people are front running buying stuff up, if people are selling. You can use it as arbitrage bots across different networks. So anything that relies on quick and accurate data, I find hooks into some of these key data sources. So whether that be V4, which works with very fast indexing, V4XYZ on MVO, or uses the subgraph standard put forth by Uniswap v4. Between those two, you've got pretty damn quick traffic. Like if we open this up, you can see the number of swaps that are actually being pulled in live time and indexed. kind of crackers when you see it run that quickly.
Yeah, I assume a lot of that is because of the flash blocks now too, right? They're just flying in from everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, now that Flash blocks is very prominent on base and spreading to other networks and things like that, it is very much a case of data's really quick. Like I remember back when it was on Ethereum, back when I first started, you were waiting what 11 seconds, and it still felt pretty quick. And now it's 200 milliseconds to get instant responses. I mean, 2 seconds, even if you're not like on a Flash blocks enabled protocol, yeah, it's incredibly, incredibly quick now. So this need for data digest just ramps up, and people are becoming more and more aware that it's a possibility. And the lines between Web3 and Web2 are blurring a lot quicker than I kind of perceived them doing in the past. Much so to the point where now, when you've got to do a bridge to Ethereum mainnet, and I think it's a 7 or 5 day cool off period where you've got to wait for it, it's like that is like back to dial up. That's insane. Um, but yeah, it's exciting to see this. It's getting to the point where it's negligible. Like I think if they break 100 milliseconds, it's going to be faster than people can really realize. You know, you click a button and there's no realizable delay. Whether that is your transaction executing, or that is you getting data from your subgraph, or that is you getting data from um, like a direct contract call. It's all just going to get to a point where it's so quick that you wouldn't even know you're using Web3 anymore, especially
Mm.
with smart wallets coming in. Um, because that's another area. Oh, go on. You know what? You've inspired me. I'll give you another Brucey bonus for free. Um, one of the talking points that we have quite a bit around at Atrium is when we're doing custom hook development, if you call message.sender in your hook, you actually don't get the person that sent you your message, you get the pool manager. Because the way that Uniswap v4 works is it goes to the pool manager, it will make a check to see if it needs to call your hook, and then it will come back and call your hook subsequently after that. So you can't rely on message.sender, which you normally would. And then you get this little red herring, which is a sender address. But that sender address isn't your end user either. What that actually is that is the router that called your contract. So what you will generally find is that it will be Alice will make a call to a swap router. I'll just call it router so that box doesn't overflow, which then makes a call to my hook, which then makes a call to the pool manager, which then subsequently
Goes back.
makes a call back to the hook, which will then, feed back, and, there'll be before swap, after swap, etc. So in this instance here, you have a hook which is confused. You have a few different options that you can write. So message.sender would be the pool manager. And you have the actual sender variable will be the router. But then in a lot of instances, people try to use TX origin to say that must be Alice. But the issue you can get in this instance is if Alice was a smart wallet or a, let's say 7702, or Alice was a multi-sig execution, you then don't actually get the person you want either. So you wouldn't get the multi-sig address or 7702. You would get you'd get the executor at that point. But we don't want the executor, we want the executee. I think that's a word. So what do we do in this instance? And this is if you are doing your own events and passing stuff out there, we have a message sender standard. And what that allows you to do is try and best guess who the message sender is. And it's more accurate than TX Origin. It can be exploited in some ways. So they recommend in the documentation that you have a list of potential senders that you trust. So the swap router and some of the other ones. But what you can effectively do is just try and call iMessage sender to see if the caller is providing you with their message sender. So it's like piggybacking onto it. So in this process, by calling iMessage sender, message sender, message sender, that's a lot of message senders. We essentially, the router is going to say, it's going to capture their message sender inside their function. So we kind of just make a call to that text and find out the message sender belonging to the router, which in this case would give us the 7702 multi-sig execution. So a bit of a convoluted way of essentially saying if you're looking to create any custom events or anything like that inside of your hook, you can theoretically try and get the EOA or the end message sender rather than the executor, pool manager, or router. So yeah, if you're doing any data indexing in that regard, that's probably the route that you're going to want to take.
Wow.
Which took, I think it was introduced, but not really widely done. And it was in that data Telegram group that I shared earlier in the chat that someone kind of brought that to light. And then they added like this really nice write-up in their documentation, which runs through kind of why it's potentially an issue. And you can imagine, say you were doing some hook swaps and you wanted to transfer some like fee token to the sender rather than the LP position, you might want to do it that way, but how can you reliably get that user?
Mm-mm-mm. Um, and what about delegate call? Like what um I forget how I was testing it. Uh using delegate call uh,
Mm.
from the um uh wish I could write it or as it calls the router. Um can we get the message I sender that way?
Oh, interesting idea. So yeah, if you were to do a call and route it through that, yes, you would be able to. So if the router contract, rather than implementing call, was to implement delegate call instead, then yes, that would just route through the exact same sender. So if you were to create a swap router that instead implemented that, then that would work fine. I think the one reason why they generally tend to pass it on as a sender, and I'll just bring up the v4 periphery contract because I believe that is the swap router in here. Not swap router, no checks, that will help me. Okay, that's all I'm getting. So in the swap router, what it tries to do to benefit is it makes the swap, but then it takes ownership for the settling and taking of tokens. So it handles the actual accounting of your transactions within the swap router. So the way that the pool manager works is when you execute a swap, which we can see on this line here, it doesn't give or take any tokens from anyone. What it does is it will then facilitate a flash accounting check when this function's exited. So when you get a pool manager unlock, you then execute a swap. And now, if we didn't do this settling and taking, Uniswap would essentially say, wait a minute, you owe us money and we owe you tokens. Something's not right here. Like the values don't equal zero. So it will revert your call and your swap. So what you find that routers do is they will facilitate the settle and take of the token that the user is saying they're providing and take the tokens from the manager to give them to the end user because they've kind of got the context at this point. I don't see there really being a negative of actually using delegate call in this instance because you'd still be passing it to the manager. That's not doing any transfers and it would just expose better data. I've not really played with delegate call too much. I don't know if it's avoided because essentially the hook might want context of the router, but that's still passed as sender. So yeah, it might just be because they feel there would be benefit from knowing the router address in some instances, and
Right.
the message sender can potentially be determined from that iMessage center interface. But yeah, delegate call is kind of a cool idea, and there's no reason why you can't write your own custom routers for your hooks. The main reason that it should potentially be avoided in some cases is because your hook wants to be able to be used by any routing interface. So like Uniswap v4's universal router or say CowSwap's routing algorithms. And if you put in logic that's specific to your router, you can definitely get a much more tailored experience, but you do get this kind of issue where Uniswap might just not add your hook into its indexing flow, or it might just revert. You never know if it works outside the realm of anything.
Yeah, makes sense.
Mm.
Cool. Any other questions? Going once.
If there are any questions that people kind of come up with later, like if you're working or exploring your own protocol or just looking to expand or want to speak a little bit more in private, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. It's just at Tom Wade. I'll just pop that in the chat there. And yeah, if you are wanting to learn anything additional about Uniswap v4 specifically, then definitely get in touch with either myself or Atrium Academy. We run regular cohorts that free to apply and join. We do tailored workshops over the course of a couple of months. We deep dive into kind of the tech and the different areas that it touches, and essentially taking you from an understanding of blockchain into creating your own Uniswap v4 DeFi hooks and all the cool, different, magical, wonderful things you can do. And if you'd like to know anything more about that, please feel free to message me about that as well.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate you always chatting. Um, Data is a very vast and very useful topic, so hopefully everyone can take some major value out of this for sure. Well, yes, thanks, Tom. Yes.
Absolute pleasure, everyone. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what everyone builds. Yeah, with regards to in-depth education for hooks, that was the kind of thing I was just touching on. Drop me a message on Twitter or check out Atrium Academy. I'll put the Twitter. I know I should call it X, but they can't stop me. There is a regular cohorts for whether you're interested in DeFi, If you are looking at, I suppose, how would you describe it, Rafa? I'm terrible at this, but if you're, yeah, interested in being a builder, a bit of have some ideas for things that you want to do, a passion for DeFi, there's definitely areas that it's definitely worth applying for with that. And if you're at the point where you've got a hook and it's established and you want to take that further, I know there's certain accelerators that we look at facilitating as well. So yeah, please definitely follow, give Atrium Academy a follow, stay in touch. We move on for additional cohorts every couple of months. And it's where I started with Uniswap V4 many, many moons ago. And there's some great people that come through the course every year. So it'd be great to see some more friendly faces.
Yeah, that was perfect. And of course, if you want to hear more from Tom, join in and hear him chat more about Uniswap before. Cool. All right, you guys, enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Thank you, everyone, for attending.